In Oakland Cemetery in West Goshen Township, in the state of Pennsylvania, stands the unassuming headstone of Smedley Darlington Butler. And to most of us, also is buried who he was, and why he was an important figure in history. Smedley was born in Westchester, Pennsylvania on July 30, 1881. His parents were both of English Quaker descent, tracing the family's arrival in North America to sometime during the 17th century. His grandfather, Samuel Butler, served as United States Representative from Pennsylvania and later as that state's treasurer. His grandfather, Smedley Darlington, also represented Pennsylvania from 1887 to 1891 in the United States House of Representatives, and his father, Congressman Thomas Butler, served in the House for 31 years and was the chairman of the Naval Affairs Committee during both the Harding and Coolidge administrations. While attending the Quaker-affiliated Haverford School, whose students came from the upper-class Philadelphia families, he excelled as the quarterback of the football team and as captain of the baseball team. But because of the outbreak of the Spanish-American War, and against the wishes of his father, he lied about his age and idealistically enlisted in the Marine Corps, with a prestigious name behind him. Being only 16 at the time, he was commissioned as a second lieutenant, and thus began an illustrious career in the U.S. Marine Corps. Over the next 33 years he would rise to the rank of Brigadier General, which he achieved at the age of 37, to the rank of Major General 10 years later. In every theater from the Spanish-American War, the Philippines, the Boxer Rebellion, the Banana Wars, and through the First World War, he was the first Marine to be awarded the Brevet Medal and 2 Medals of Honor. But his career was not without controversy. Although as an officer, he served with distinction throughout his career, gaining respect, loyalty, and admiration from those who were under his command. And he was known for his decisive actions in the field, insisting to be alongside his troops. But as a soldier, he started to become disillusioned with what he believed to be the motives of the United States in the acquisition of territory and intervention in the Philippines along with the Latin American countries where he had been assigned. And he was not shy in expressing what he perceived to be the interest of the major American capitalist business concerns as the true driving force of American expansionism. And although his views did not sit well with his superiors or the White House, his popularity amongst his troops and the public, along with his father's influence as chairman of the House Naval Affairs Committee coupled with his success, shielded him from any real reprimand. After his retirement he became a spokesman against the American wars and the consequences of the imperialistic motivations he believed inspired them. He published a book titled War is a Racket in 1935 in which he expressed his beliefs. In March of 1932 the Depression had already taken a toll on the working class. Unemployment was running rampant, and many of the World War I veterans were out of work since its onset. Retired General Butler had decided to run for the U.S. Senate in the Pennsylvania primary, which he lost the following April. During his campaign he promoted the veterans' demands for the immediate payment of the service certificates they were granted under the World War Adjustment Compensation Act of 1924. The act promised full payment of the face value plus interest, but the problem was that the certificates wouldn't mature until 20 years after being issued. 43,000 protesters, 17,000 of which were veterans along with their families, marched into Washington, D.C. They petitioned Congress to pass legislation to release the funds. They set up a tent city while they waited in protest, laying the blame for their conditions right on the White House steps. Congress did vote and overwhelmingly defeated the motion called the Patman Bill. The protesters were ordered to evacuate by July 20th. On July 19th, Smedley Butler and his son arrived and joined in support of the veterans' cause. He spoke with the veterans and gave a speech expressing his belief in their right to protest. Then on the morning of July 28th, the President ordered General Douglas MacArthur to lead the cavalry into the camp and disperse the veterans by riding through them using gas and violence against them. Butler's alliance with the veterans was heartfelt. He continued to speak out against the Hoover administration, and in December he toured the country with James Van Zandt, recruiting members for the Veterans of Foreign War. He condemned the Economy Act of 1933 and FDR because of his ties with the large business concerns. He also urged the veterans to organize and exercise voting for their beliefs. In November of 1932, as the Depression worsened, the Democratic candidate Franklin Delano Roosevelt defeated the incumbent Herbert Hoover in the presidential election. The progressive policies Roosevelt enacted were of great concern to many of the nation's businessmen. Roosevelt had campaigned promising that the government would provide jobs for all the unemployed. Once in office, he decided to take the nation off the gold standard, to cease minting gold coinage and making the private possession of gold currency illegal, and required every citizen to surrender their gold in exchange for paper money. He believed that by printing more currency he could stimulate spending in order to help ease the economy. Businessmen and financiers were appalled by the measure, which they feared would be inflationary. They damned and labeled him a socialist and a communist, hell-bent on destroying private enterprise by taking the wealth of the rich to better the poor. Their dissatisfaction with Roosevelt was widely held. They spoke amongst themselves about ways to curb his policies, if not find a way to remove him from office. On July 1, 1933, retired General Butler was visited at his home in Pennsylvania by William Doyle, the commander of the Massachusetts American Legion, and Gerald McGuire, to ask him to run for national commander of the American Legion. Then a couple of days later, they held another meeting, in which they urged Butler to also give a speech at the convention, held in Chicago, to adopt a resolution to return to the gold standard, and promising to pay the veterans their war bonus, and that the money they received would not be in worthless paper money. Butler took exception to this notion and declined their offer. Then in August, McGuire met with Butler alone to inform him that Grayson Murphy would finance the arrangement for 500,000 veterans to attend the convention and support Butler for national commander. Again, Butler refused, telling McGuire that the American Legion was nothing but a strike-breaking outfit. Then on August 22, McGuire tried to recruit Butler to preside over a new veterans organization and lead a coup against President Roosevelt. He told Butler that very powerful men had $50 million to spend, and they could muster 500,000 American Legion members to march on Washington. According to Butler, he later met with Robert Sterling Clark, the heir of the Singer Sewing Machine Company. Clark confirmed everything that McGuire had told him. Clark also told him the names of the plotters, who included executives of the DuPont Corporation, including Irene DuPont, former Democratic candidate Al Smith, Thomas Lamont, Grayson Murphy, a director of Goodyear Tire and Bethlehem Steel, that the weapons would be provided by the Remington Arms Company, which was now owned by the DuPonts. In September, while attending the Veterans of Foreign War Convention, he warned Commander James Van Zandt that the co-conspirators planned to meet him at the convention to again urge him into participating in the planned fascist coup to take place, with a march on Washington. He also informed some members of Congress of the events. That same September, a reporter for the Philadelphia Record, Paul Comley French, who had previously served as Butler's personal secretary, conducted an interview with McGuire in his office, in which McGuire openly spoke about the plot and his desire for a fascist America. He also named some of his fellow conspirators. French wrote an exposé that appeared in both the Philadelphia Record and the New York Post on November 20th. 2 days later, the New York Times published their article, calling French's story nothing more than a gigantic hoax. In November, congressional hearing began before a House committee, headed by Representatives John W. McCormick of Massachusetts and Samuel Dickstein of New York. The committee released its preliminary report on November 24, declaring that without any evidence before it against the alleged conspirators, they decided not to call on any of them before it for direct testimony, based on what was felt to be hearsay. They later decided to hear directly from General Butler. Smedley Butler testified before the committee about McGuire and the group of businessmen involved in the plot.
I appeared before the Congressional Committee, the highest representation of the American people, under subpoena to tell what I knew of activities which I believe might lead to an attempt to set up a fascist dictatorship. The plan as outlined to me was to form an organization of veterans, to use as a bluff, or as a club at least, to intimidate the government and break down our democratic institutions. The upshot of the whole thing was that I was supposed to lead an organization of 500,000 men.
And he provided overseas correspondences that he received from McGuire and Robert Sterling Clark while in Europe, detailing various fascist organizations. McGuire, under oath, denied the accusations. The committee released its final report on February 15, 1935. In it they concluded that evidence existed that certain persons had tried to establish a fascist organization within the country, and that these attempts were discussed, were planned, and might have taken place and executed, when and if the financial backers deemed it expedient. The committee was able to verify all the pertinent statements made by General Butler. There were to be no prosecutions or any further investigations conducted. And when their final report was released, the New York Times changed their position and reported that General Butler's story was in fact alarmingly true, and alleged that definite proof had been found that the March on Washington had actually been contemplated. All the accused individuals denied any involvement nor the existence of any plot. In the aftermath, the American press turned their attention to President Roosevelt's progressive social programs to battle the Depression. His National Recovery Act of 1933, along with the creation of many federal agencies through the new Civilian Conservation Corps, the Civil Works Administration, the Works Progress Administration, among other projects, gave the press plenty to write about. And the turmoil overseas, with the Japanese quest of imperial expansionism following the invasion of Manchuria, the Italian conquest of Ethiopia by the fascist Benito Mussolini, the annexations of Austria by the fascist Nazi government of Adolf Hitler, and his invasion of Czechoslovakia, left the world on edge as the events pointed more and more towards another world war. As for Smedley Butler, with his book, War is a Racket, published in 1935, he continued to publicly speak out against war. Then in June of 1940, after feeling ill for some time, he checked into the Naval Hospital in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The doctors found his condition to be terminal, and his family joined him by his side, as he died on June 21, 1940.
Makes me so damn mad a whole lot of people speak of you as tramp. By God, they didn't speak of you as tramps in 1917 and 18. Oh. Let me tell you something. I've been all over the world. I've seen you fellas on the streets in Washington. There isn't this well-behaved group of citizens in the world that's sitting right in this camp. Take it from me, this is the greatest demonstration of Americanism we've ever had.